In today's lesson, we are going to be looking at budgeting and loans. So this is going to be kind of, again, one of our combination lessons, looking at a few different financial literacy terms, some finance terms, and dealing with some interest and some calculations. So it's going to be kind of a mix of just general kind of theory type questions and calculations that you might be used to in math. So, thinking of finance and financial goals, right? A financial goal is an objective which is based on how we want to manage our money, right? So basically, it's just a goal that we're dealing or we're setting with money. It could be something like debt reduction, so reducing debt, right? Whether it's paying back loans or paying back money that we borrowed, things like that, or credit card debt. Saving for retirement, right, is a financial goal. Like you want to be set up so that when you retire, you don't have to worry about working anymore. And it could be something maybe smaller, like saving for a new car, saving for a new phone, right? TV, video game, clothing, something like that. So any type of goal where basically we want to manage our money is considered a financial goal. So taking a look at this advertisement, just think about some things. What do you notice and what do you wonder? Right? Is there anything that you notice, anything that you wonder about the picture? Right? You might notice about the price, the sale, the type of picture, or the type of TV, um, the different options. But if you can't really think of anything, I want you to kind of draw your eyes down to this portion here where it says buy now, pay later with a new Best Buy card financing program and start your application, right? So there is an option where, we can get this $6,500, $70,000 or $7,000 TV without paying anything up front now, which sounds like a pretty good deal, right? But if we want to finance a purchase, right? If we finance a purchase, that means you agree to pay or you agree to pay for it, but you pay for it slowly through small payments rather than all at once. You agree to the length of time, the interest rate, the payment, and the compounding frequency. And the compounding frequency just again deals with how often you're going to pay. It could also deal with how the interest is calculated. So this is kind of usually all prearranged for you. You don't really get much of a say, especially if you're doing some finance options, or you don't get much of a say with this type of purchase, right, or this type of concept. Right? Usually, the company or the business already has it kind of set up because it kind of has to benefit them if they're going to give you a product for free and then have you pay it back over time. So financing a purchase does seem like a good idea. I don't have to pay for it all now. I can pay it off in smaller amounts, right? Pay it off later, right? And it can be a responsible option. It can be a good option when you need something rather than want it, but do not have the cash available to pay for it, right? So whether it could be maybe if you need a car, right? But you don't have the money right now to buy a full car. It could be maybe for a house. Or it could be for maybe you do need that TV, or maybe you're buying stuff for your house or furniture, things like that. So there might be reasons where you do need to make a large purchase and you need it now, but you don't have the cash available. If you have the income to make your payments on the loan, so when you go through and you finance, you would get basically, or you'd be told what the monthly payment, what the weekly, or what the yearly payment, whatever it happens to be, you would be told what that payment is. If you have the income to make it work over time, because you can afford that small amount every month, every week, whatever the case may be, right, it could be a good option. If you get a good financing option, so if you find places where the rates are good, right, so usually a lot of car dealerships, they usually have kind of days where the interest rates are really low, or the first payments are on them, things like that. If those options are good, then that might be a situation where, okay, you know what, it might be a good idea to finance. Here we see an example of a Samsung curved 105-inch 4K Ultra HD TV for $120,000 on Amazon, right? And the person commented 5 stars, financing available. I was able to purchase this amazing television with a 30-year fixed rate loan for only 3.5% down. Right? He said this is the best decision that they've ever made. The box is extremely roomy too, which is a huge bonus since that's what they live in. Right? Because you think you're going to take 30 years to pay off a TV with their financing options. Right? So obviously this is a bit more of a joke, but there are certain situations where financing is not a good idea. Right? So when it's for something that you want rather than need. Right? So something, if you need something, or if you want something rather than need it, but do not have the money to pay for it, then maybe chances are it's something that that's something that maybe you should just hold off on. Right? If you don't need it right now, you might as well hold off on it. When the financing options are bad, so that means that it will be very expensive in the end, right? Some companies, right, they know that you're stuck, right? Or some businesses know you might be stuck. So you might be paying for a lot more, or the payments might make your item more expensive in the end, which might make it not worth it, right? Unfortunately, that's kind of the crummy side of some of these businesses, or the idea of financing, right? They have the money. They know not everyone does, so they kind of prey on that. But in some situations, you might be stuck, right? You think of like mortgages. People need houses. Right? And sometimes those mortgage deals aren't great, or the prices go up. Right? Look at right now, recently with the mortgage rates, the prices have gone up, or the interest rates have gone up. Right? So some people are finding it difficult to make their mortgage payments because of these increased rates. Not what they signed up for, in a sense, or maybe they didn't think that the prices would go, or the rates would go that high. But unfortunately, that's kind of what happens. So there are good and bad reasons, or there might be for choosing to finance. So kind of see here, good news, he got the loan, but unfortunately it cost him an arm and a leg. Dangers of financing, right? So dangers of financing in general, right? It could make your budget so tight that, if you make your budget so tight that you miss monthly payments, it could harm your credit score, right? And a credit score is helpful when you do want to make those big loans, those big kind of commitments to either a mortgage, or taking out a student loan, or maybe starting a business, right? You might need to have a good credit score. And if you can't make your payments, then that could affect it. Or it might not have you might not have enough money for needs and your payment, right? So depending on how you budget, right, you might miss those monthly payments, or you might have to take money from that to make your payment, so you miss out, or you can't pay for other things. Kind of more, kind of not really related to finance, but like sleepless nights, right? Debt is not a good thing, right? A lot of people stress over debt, right? And say that's one of probably the big things in adulthood. People stress over debt, whether it's for, again, like mortgages, student loans, right? Paying for children to go to university, or paying for children in general, things like that. Buyer's remorse. Right? When you realize what you want was not worth the anxiety, was not worth the extra payment, right? If with the financing, chances are you might be paying more than what you would be if you just bought the item outright. But if you have it over time, or you go back to example that TV, you're paying for it for 30 years. After 10 years, it might break. It might not even be up to date anymore, right? So depending on buy, you might get buyer's remorse if you're still paying it off over a long period of time. So some budgeting tips. We're going through and looking at budgeting tips, right? So if we're financing, right, we might want to budget our money, or maybe so we don't have to finance, we want to budget our money so we have money saved up. Right? So some budgeting tips, right? Total income involves all sources of income that are consistently paid to you. So when you look at your total income, that's all sources of income, all money coming in. And it's better to underestimate your income. Right? It's better to underestimate how much money you're going to be making, because in that way, if you make more, great, right? Or if something happens, or you kind of have a little bit more wiggle room to play with. Expenses can be organized into variable and fixed categories. It'd also be a good idea to determine discretionary and non-discretionary expenses. Right? So these are some different terms that you might come across when dealing with finances, or when dealing with budgeting. And we will talk about those in a second. Right? And it's better to overestimate your expenses. So it's better to overestimate how much money you're going to have to pay. Because if you overestimate, then that means you're kind of planning if something does come up, if the rates change, if something changes, and you know you do need to spend more money, or you do have to kind of budget more money. So better to underestimate your income and better to overestimate your expenses. If you end up with more money later or whatever the case may be, that's always a good thing. I don't think anyone would complain about that. So some living expenses, some key terms. We kind of talked about variable and fixed, discretionary, non-discretionary. So discretionary versus non-discretionary. Discretionary is a need, is a want. Right? So discretionary is a want. It's something we want. Right? So maybe it's armor for a guinea pig, right? A diamond encrusted tea bag for your tea. A $860 automatic litter box for your cat. Maybe a $500 Prada money clip that looks like a paper clip. Maybe you didn't even see the Prada marking, but it's a $500 paper clip or money clip. Right? Those would be wants. Right? We don't need those items. Right? Those would be wants. Now, non-discretionary, those are needs. Right? So that might be money for a rent payment, right? Or groceries, or a car, or car payments, clothing. Right? Obviously, if you remember from our presentation on gambling, right, some of those items, right, might be, there's ranges within that, right? Do you need the highest fashion, right? The $200 hoodie, right? $300 pair of shoes? No, probably not. So within those categories, there might be wants and needs as well. But overall, you do need clothing. You do need food. You probably need transportation of some sort. You do need housing. When looking at housing specifically, we might have what we call fixed and variable expenses, right? Or utilities, right? Gas, electricity, water, right? So utilities usually refers to that. And some of those things might fall under fixed or variable. And if we're not sure what that means, we're going to take a look. So we have two here, or we have a table of expenses, right? They normally associate with a house or utilities, right? Gas, water, phone, maybe not so much telephones anymore because everyone has just a cell phone, but say cell phone instead. Rent, car, electricity. Looking at these, which ones do you think are fixed and which ones are variable? Or if I tell you that some of these are fixed and some of these are variable, which ones do you think are which? And if it helps, let me do this. So gas is fixed. Telephone is fixed. Rent is fixed. Car is fixed. Water is variable and electricity is variable. Does that make it better? Does that make it easier? So if we're looking at these, what do we notice about all the fixed ones? Well, in this case, fixed expenses, they stay the same. So the expenses stay the same for fixed expenses, right? The cost doesn't change, the price doesn't change. Yes, it might change at some point, but then it's going to stay consistent, right? You're going to be paying $120.10 for gas for your house every month. Yes, they might then up the price, but then it's going to stay that price for a while, right? So fixed expenses could change, but the idea is that they stay fairly consistent and they're not changing every payment. Variable expense, so this just basically means the cost changes. Right? So the cost changes in this case. So this would be something like water. The water expense changes based on how much water you use. Same with electricity. Electricity changes based on how much electricity you use. If you have the lights on every day, all day, right, your electricity bill will be higher. Right? If you're not home and you turn the lights off, it will be less. Right? So fixed stays the same, variable cost changes, or you could say the costs vary. Right? So even just reading the word itself kind of helps us with that. So let's take a look at some of these examples and let's kind of break them up into discretionary or wants and non-discretionary needs, as well as fixed and variable. So let's start with hydro bills. So hydro bills, right? Electricity, right? These would be non-discretionary, right? They're needs, and they could be variable because they will change depending on how much you use. Vacation, vacation would be a want, and it would be variable. Right? Depending on how much your vacation is, chances are it probably changes. Food, food would be variable, and it would be discretionary. We need food to live, so it would be discretionary. Water, water would be a non-discretionary, right? It's a need. We need water. It's also variable depending on how much water we use. That would affect our bill. We have water twice, unless we're talking about gym water, but we're not. Gym membership. Now, again, you could argue which way you go. Do you need the gym membership or do you want the gym membership? I would argue that you probably want the gym membership. You can always stay healthy at home and do like exercises or go for walks, things like that. But that would be a fixed amount. Usually your gym membership is one payment or one like monthly payment. It stays the same. Gas bill. So gas bill is a fixed amount. Right? So when you get your gas bill, it is a fixed amount. Right? Renting the furnace, the HVAC, whatever the case may be. So it is a fixed amount, roughly fixed, and that doesn't change. And it is a non-discretionary or a need. Your mortgage, right? If you're renting or if you're owning a house, your mortgage, we can cross off rent as well. Those would both fall under needs, right? For a house or an apartment or a rental, right? You do need to pay that, and it would be a fixed amount. It's the same amount every year. Or not every year, sorry, every month it'd be the same amount. Toiletries, so that's like more hygiene products. You would need those, right? Everyone should have good hygiene. That would be variable. How much you spend on toiletries would change. Special pair of shoes, right? This would be discretionary. It's a want, and it would vary. The price would vary or could change, so it would be a variable expense. Coffee at Tim Hortons, right? Again, this one might be some flexibility. It might be variable because what you get might change, but if you're getting the same coffee every day, that would be fixed. But either way, I would say it falls under discretionary. Right? Is there any other? We'll look at some other ones. For example, Disney Plus. Right? Disney Plus would be a want and it's fixed. Right? You pay the same price every month. Let's say, for example, house insurance. That's another one a common one. That is a need. It's a non-discretionary, and it is a fixed amount. You pay the same amount for your house insurance every month or every year. Well, probably every month. The yearly one is broken down to what you would pay each month. Usually it stays the same. Cell phone bill, again, depending on a need versus a want, right? Usually we say everyone probably, in this day and age, everyone needs a cell phone, and it usually is a fixed amount. Gone are the days of where you go over your data and you have to pay for an extra 5 gigs, whatever the case, or you have to pay for the amount of text messages you sell, things like that. So you can play around with some of the other ones that we didn't cover. Again, depending on what you're looking at, it might vary. Right? You could get very technical and say things like, oh, well, it depends on what video game console I buy, or it depends on what size iPad, or the comic books or movie. Like, again, there's lots of different ways you could argue some of them. But usually I would say all the ones that are left, maybe excluding haircut. Haircut, you might argue, is a need. The other ones are most likely wants, right? You don't really need an iPad or need a video game console or need comic books or need Taylor Swift tickets, something like that. So next, right, analyzing spending habits. Right? So we're going to be looking at some of those budgets that we kind of talked about. So Carter recently started a part-time job. He lives with his parents and does not need to pay for basic living expenses. So he finished the month with less money than he started with, right, which is not a good thing. So he started to track his expenses to figure out where he is overspending. So we're going to take a look at his bank statement for August. So here's his bank statement, and we want to take a look at some of the spending habits. So if this is a typical month, right, we see what it's broken down daily, we see what the details, whether there's a debit or a credit, and then the balance. We want to think about, what does he spend his money on? What does he tend to spend his money on? Well, if we look through it, right, we see deposits, we see a withdrawal, a charge, a network access fee, movies, subs, more withdrawals, clothes, movies, cell phones, right? So a lot of the things that he's buying is a lot of personal stuff, right? So let's go back to our note. So in a typical month, what does he spend his money on? He spends his money on a lot of maybe entertainment, clothes, cell phone, and we don't know what he's doing with the money that he draws. So, but he is spending his money mostly on entertainment, clothes, and cell phones. Right. Next thing we want to look at is, how can we organize his spending into categories, right? So when you're looking at a statement or you're looking at your expenses, you want to kind of categorize them into the different categories of where you're spending your money. So if we wanted to break this up into categories, we would have the entertainment, going to the movies, things like that. He does that quite a bit, right? Cell phones, right? So one category for his cell phone bill, right? There's another category for clothing. There's also now categories for also bank fees, because we looked at his statement, there are a lot of bank fees on there. And you might add just spending money in general. So just looking at spending money, if we go back and look at his statement, right, just something like with the cash withdrawals, right, withdrawing $40 here, $20 here, another 40 here, 60 here, 40 here, or 20 here, right? We don't know what he's doing with that money, but chances are you're withdrawing cash, you're spending money, right? So there might be another category that we add for that focuses just on kind of the cash withdrawals. What other categories that Carter may want to add? Well, maybe something like savings, right? He doesn't seem to be saving any money, so savings might be something he wants to add, right? Investing, right? Maybe he's going to put money into stocks every year or every month. Maybe transportation, right? How does he get around? Whether it's a bus or whether it's a car, right? So you might have to pay for put or balance out those things, right? So just by looking at your spending habits, right, you might be able to identify where you spend more of your money on, and coming up with putting them into categories is definitely helpful. If you get a credit card and take a look at your statement, your credit card bill, usually the credit card company will actually categorize it for you based on what they think a certain place or a certain business might be found under. So they also kind of give you a breakdown of how you spend your money as well. So a budget is basically when we take our expenses, right? When we take some of our income as well, and we organize it, right? So a budget is an organized income and expense plan. So we do see something like that here. Right? So below is what we see is an example of a budget. We see the income over here. We see the expenses over here, right? And we can actually go through and determine what the total income is, right? So if we go through and add up this income, $312.61 plus $290.09, we end up with $602.70. And then for the total expenses, 200 plus 100 plus 110 plus 95 plus 60, $565. So the balance then, the income minus the expenses, we end up with $37.70. So is this a balanced budget? Now you might say yes, right? You might say yes, it's balanced. He's not in debt, right? He has money, right? So it's a balanced budget. He's not spending more than he's making. Technically, it's not balanced. Balanced is when the income matches the expenses. So if you want to write that down just as a reminder, balanced means income equals expenses. So in this case, he does not have a balanced budget because he has more money than he's allocated, right? So technically, this would be called, we mentioned this, or you might have mentioned this in the presentation, this would be called a surplus. So he has a surplus of funds. He has more money than he's accounted for, right? Which, again, when you're budgeting, that's not a bad thing. But if you're talking about businesses, if you have extra money and you don't know where it came from, that's a bad thing. But in terms of balancing, it's not balanced. We have a surplus of funds. Now, you could just say, well, I'm going to take this extra money and put it into savings, right? It's just making another category, right? Just general savings and accounting for that. And that would make it balanced. So it's okay to have a surplus, better than having a deficit. But in terms of balancing, it's not a balanced budget. So why or why not? So because balance is the income equals expenses. So it's more income than expenses. So technically it's not balanced because there's more income than expenses. So we'll also put down not balanced. And why is saving for post-secondary education listed as an expense? Right? So why do we have this category up here as an expense when we're saving money? Right? And the reason is it's very simple. The reason is just that money is being set aside. Right? Money is being put away. Right? We're not. It's just an allocation of money. Money is being, say, used or put away. Right? We have a place for it, right? So it's again, we're keeping that in mind because we're not spending that money. We're specifically allocating it away so that we know we don't spend it. So it's considered an expense, even though we're not technically spending it. But we're making sure that we allocate it away so that we don't spend it later on something else. So with those budgets, right, hopefully you come up with a good budget. Hopefully you're able to budget your money, right, knowing what you can spend it on, needs and wants and things like that. However, sometimes that's not the case, right? Or sometimes the things we want are just too big and we need to take out loans. So let's look at a quick example. So Imani is getting a $12,000 loan at 8% interest to start a business. The bank employee tells Imani her monthly payment is $243.32 over 5 years. So what is the total amount that Imani will have to pay the bank? So if it's a monthly payment of $243.32 over 5 years, right, first we want to figure out, well, how many months are in 5 years? So 5 times 12 equals 60. So there's 60 months in 5 years. So then we can take the $243.32, multiply it by 60, and we get $14,599.20. So the total amount that Imani will pay the bank will be $14,599.20. So the next thing we want to think about is, okay, well, if that's how much she's paying the bank, how much of interest did she actually pay? In this case, we're just going to take the $14,599.20, subtract the amount of the loan, which was $12,000, and we get 2,599.20. So over the 5 years, you're paying an extra $2,600 roughly on that $12,000 loan, right? So again, that's the downside to taking out a loan. You're going to be paying more back than what you borrowed, and that's kind of like the cost of borrowing the money. So it's just something you want to be mindful of. So with that, sometimes we might have to calculate interest. One type of interest that we're going to learn how to calculate is just simple interest. This is the very basic kind of interest. Realistically, a lot of things don't really use simple interest. They use more what we call compound interest, which we'll look at briefly. But simple interest is a good kind of way to kind of at least get introduced to the concept of it. So simple interest is interest calculated on the principal. And we'll talk about principal and the total time period. So to calculate simple interest, we use the formula I equals PRT, where I represents the interest earned, P represents the amount invested or in an account, and R represents the interest rate expressed as a decimal, and then T represents the time in years. So that's the general formula. We're going to go through and look at an example, right? So for example, you've deposited $1,000 in a new student account at the bank. The bank applies simple interest at a rate of 3.65% per year. If you make no further deposits or withdrawals from your account, how much interest will you earn in 1 year? Right? So this is just going to be straightforward. We want to figure out what the values are. So P, our principal, which is the amount that we've invested, or the amount in the account, is $1,000. R is the rate, or 3.65%, but as a decimal. So we divide it by 100, so 0.0365. T is the time in years, right? We're only doing 1 year, so really straightforward. And I is the interest, which is what we're going to calculate. So I equals PRT. I equals the principal 1,000 times 0.0365 times 1, and we get an interest, or the interest amount, of $36.50. So that means at the end of 1 year, you would have earned $36.50, which isn't that bad, right? For not doing anything, just earning free money. So that's the one nice thing about interest, is if you're saving money, right, you earn interest. So you earn extra money. If you're borrowing or taking out a loan, you have to pay interest. So then you have to pay extra on top of that. So that's where there's the downside. Right? And we will look at the difference between simple and compound, which I mentioned before as the two types of interest. We will look at that later. But in terms of calculations, really, you might just have to calculate simple interest, which would just be using this formula. So when we're borrowing money, or we're taking out loans, or we're saving money, right, it's important to understand that there are different interest rates, different lengths of borrowing times, and different loan amounts that can have an effect on the overall cost of a loan, right? So the different interest rates, the different borrowing times, right, how much money you're taking out, that can affect how much you're going to end up paying overall. And all these variables are called loan parameters. Right? So these are all kind of like the characteristics of a loan, you might say. So for example, a loan may be taken out to buy a used car for $9,000 at 3.5% for 4 years. The parameters are 1, the principal, which is how much you took out, the interest rate, and the term, how long you're going to take to pay this back. Now, where loans are concerned, the bank often applies what is known as compound interest. So not what we just calculated, a different type. And this is something that's applied more often, right? It's monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, right? So it's, simple interest is once a year, right? Compound interest could be every month interest is added, every quarter interest is added, and every half a year interest is added, right? So that's why banks like to use that. because they can earn more money or charge you more money for your loan. Now, most financial institutions offer an online loan calculator, right, to kind of figure out and allow you to change kind of the parameters to see what might the cost be. I did put a link in D2L for one. It's from RBC. We're going to use that for a couple questions. So suppose later in life you want to borrow $5,000 for a large purchase. The bank will charge you 8% interest compounded monthly to borrow the money. You will make monthly payments to the bank for 3 years. Right, so the parameters, it's a $5,000 loan, 8% interest, right, compounded monthly, and you're going to take 3 years to pay that back. And you're going to be making monthly payments. So let's go to our loan calculator and figure out what would the amount of the monthly payment be. So we have our loan calculator. This is just coming right from the link that's in D2L. Borrowing reason, don't really care about that. You can just put whatever you want. So it's $5,000. The interest rate is 8%. The nice thing is we don't need to actually do anything here. We don't need to change anything or do any small calculations. Loan repayment period. So it's going to be 3 years and it is going to be monthly. And we're going to get the results. And RBC has said that based off of this, it is going to cost us our monthly payment is going to be $156.68. So that's how much we're going to have to pay back. Now, it's already gone through and given us the total interest costs, which we are going to calculate. But let's do that one by hand just so we can kind of see the difference and kind of work through it. So we calculated $156.68, right, over 3 years or 36 months. Take that monthly payment, multiply it by 36. We end up with $5,640.48. So that means how much money will the bank charge you for borrowing money? Well, in this case, and it's already calculated that, $640.48. So that means that over 3 years, you're paying an extra $640 on that loan you took out. So you'd have to pay back the loan plus an extra $640. Right? So that's the thing about loans. You don't just get the money and only pay the interest. You have to pay back the money that you took out. So state one advantage and one disadvantage to borrowing money. Well, the one advantage, you get the money, right? You get money. You can make purchases. Right? Maybe you're taking out $5,000 for a car, right? You can make that purchase when you don't technically have $5,000 saved up, but you could pay off the $156.68 every month. You could do that, right? That might be more manageable. One disadvantage to borrowing money, it costs money. It'd be great if it was free. It'd be great if the bank said, you know what, we trust you. We'll just give you this money. You pay it back to us whenever you want, and we're not going to charge you for it. Right? It'd be pretty dumb on their part, right? But it would be nice. But that's one of the disadvantages to borrowing money. Anytime you have to borrow money, right, chances are it's going to cost you. And banks, right, might not be the greatest, but it's better than some of the loan companies, right? Those kind of quick, if it's easy, really easy to get the money, right, really quick and easy, and they don't put up much of a fuss, check the interest rates. Chances are it's probably expensive. Let's just take another example and looking at those parameters. So let's say we go back and let's say we want to pay back the loan in 2 years, right? We don't want to pay for, making payments for 3 years. We want to do it for 2 years. Right? So if we go back and we change it from 3 years to 2 years and we get the results, let's see what our loan payment would be. So our monthly payment then would be $226.14. So our calculator did the job. It calculated the payment, $226.14. Now, how much would that we'd have to pay back over the 2 years? So 2 years is now 24 months. So 226.14 times 24, we would be paying back $5,427.36. Right, so thinking about it, it's like, okay, that's not too bad, right? It is actually cheaper over the 2 years, which does kind of make sense, right? We're only really paying an extra $427.27. So if you compare the two, right, you're paying an extra $220 to pay it off an extra year, right? So $220 a year, that for an extra, that might be worthwhile to switch it down to 2 years. Right? So there is an advantage to kind of paying it back over a shorter period of time, right? Obviously, the advantage, loan paid off earlier. Loan will be paid off earlier, right? You don't owe as much, right? You pay less interest. Right? They'd be done if you did 2 years, you'd be done a year earlier. You would have saved the $200 in interest, right? But the disadvantage, right? The monthly payment is higher. Right. So when you look at those parameters, there are ways to kind of reduce the amount of interest, right? Obviously, there are some easy ones like the rate. Make sure you have a low rate, right? Make more frequent payments, right? Rather than doing monthly, do bi-weekly or so twice a month, right? There are ways aside from just shortening the loan payment period, right? Or maybe take out less money or put some money down, right? Say, okay, I'm going to give you $500 up front to take out this large loan. And so then you've kind of paid off the $500, so to speak, already, which sometimes happens when you do like down payments on houses or things like that. Right? So there are ways to kind of reduce the fees or the interest. Lastly, just looking at which one would you choose? $10,000 in an account with simple interest at 7% for 10 years, or $10,000 in an account with compound interest at 7% for 10 years. So the key difference is the compound interest versus the simple interest. Right? We know about simple interest. Compound interest we might know a little bit about, but if we look at it graphically, looking at the difference over those 10 years, right, if you look at just after the 10 years at the very last one, compound earns you almost an extra $2,600, so $2,671.51. Right? We kind of talked about this before too. Compound interest, the one in orange, is nonlinear. Simple interest is linear. It's the same amount every year. So you're only earning interest on the original amount that you put in. Right? So in this case, we see 7% on 10,000. You earn interest of $700, and that's all that it is. It doesn't change. Compound interest, you earn interest on top of the interest that you've already earned. So we earn the same 7% the first year, so the same $700, but then for year 2, you're going to earn 7% on this amount. So that's why we see a slight increase in year 2 or difference in year 2. Year 3, you're earning 7% on this amount, which again, so it's going to be increasing a little bit more and a little bit more each time. That's why banks like compound interest, right? They can convince you, or when you are saving money and earning interest, it's compound interest, right? So you're earning more money than you would with simple interest. However, when you have to borrow money, you're also going to be charged compound interest. And when you borrow money, that requires you to pay back the extra interest, the more interest that would come with compound interest. And the reason they get away with it is because when you borrow money, the interest rate is a lot higher than when you save money and the interest that the bank would pay you. Right? the interest in your account might be 1%, 1 to 2%, right? But the interest on a loan, right, credit cards, it's like 19%, right, 22%, right? So the loans interest on loans are much higher than they are compared to when you're saving. But this was a long lesson looking at a bunch of different financial topics and concepts, right? Few calculations in there when we're looking at budgeting or when we're looking at loan repayments and the amount of interest earned. But it's a lot of useful stuff. So stick with it. Make sure you kind of go through the lesson. If there's anything that you kind of missed, please make sure you go back and kind of refresh yourself. Even though some of this might seem like common sense, it doesn't hurt to kind of refresh your memory, or just make sure you understand the concepts that we've talked about.